Okay, hello, good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Greg Keston. I teach in the physics department and serve as the Associate Director of Science Ed. And on behalf of the Harvard University Division of Science, the Harvard Bookstore, and Harvard Library, I'm very excited to welcome you to this Harvard Science Book Talk with Dr. Bethany Brookshire, discussing her book, Pests. And before we get into all of that, I just want to let everybody know that if you'd like to know about our other events, we have a website. So let me just pull it up here. So this is our website. You can hear about upcoming events there. We have an event on March 31st, A Hacker's Mind, How the Powerful Bend Society's Rules and How to Bend Them Back, and that's Bruce Brookshire. And we also have a YouTube channel, and on our YouTube channel, you can see great talks. We had a mind-blowing one about a month ago by Sean Carroll, who talked about the biggest ideas in the universe, space, time, and motion, which was wonderful. But tonight, we are very excited to have Dr. Bethany Brookshire, who is an award-winning freelance journalist and author, and she writes on human-animal conflict, ecology, environmental science, and neuroscience. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Guardian, and that's just a few of them. And she posts the wonderful Science for the People podcast. And she'll be discussing her book with Harriet Ritvo, who is the Arthur J. Connor Professor of History Emeritus at MIT. And Professor Ritvo's research has focused on the history of human relations with animals, environmental history, among other subjects, and her current work engages with wildness and domestication. And she's written a number of interesting books. The most relevant, I just learned, is titled The Platypus and the Mermaid and Other Figments of the Classifying Imagination. Tonight, they'll be discussing Bethany's book, Pests, How Humans Create Animal Villains, and author Hal Herzog describes it as a deeply thoughtful yet entertaining tour of our thorny and morally complicated relationships with the creatures that we consider pests. So following the brief talk and then the conversation, we'll have a Q&A. And so you can ask your questions, start thinking about them as the talk goes, but try to keep them brief when you talk and wait for the microphone to come around to you. We'll have somebody come bring the microphone to you. And then after all of this, after the Q&A, we'll actually have a reception, a book signing. You can pick up Pests, the book, in the back of the auditorium, or right outside the door, and you can also get some nibbles of cheese and some drinks in the library. And one last note, this one's actually important to know for the talk. Students and faculty know this. They don't like to talk about it, but Harvard is actually the US's oldest and longest running pest-infested university. So obviously we're very interested in hearing what you're going to talk about.
Hey, y'all. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. And I would like to say that you will not acquire pests from me. I showered before I got here. I am fully deloused. I would also like to say, on behalf of my undergraduate institution, the College of William and Mary, we are the second oldest, most pest-infested university in the United States. And we never got over it. So let's see if I can just, whoa. How do I go to this? Does anybody know? He knows. And I would like to say I'm so happy, especially to be here with Harriet, because when I came to MIT and to Harvard to do a night science journalism fellowship in 2019, 2020, we all know what happened. We don't talk about it. But my first class was with Harriet. And it was a wonderful class called People and Other Animals. And the first chapter of this book was actually written as my final paper for her class. So she saw it before anybody else, and I'm so, so grateful for her feedback. So yes, my name is Bethany. This is my book. Please buy 10 copies. I wanted to talk today about what a pest is and what it means, because we designate animals pests all the time, but that's such a subjective measure, and it has so much to do with what we think and what we want and what we believe about the places that we live in. So one of my favorite examples of that is that what we really hate about pests is their success. We hate their success. We hate it so much. We love animals that are failing. Consider the panda. Would everyone love the panda if the entire United States was infested with pandas? I promise you would not. You would be annoyed. You would hit them with your cars, you know? And I think that says everything, how much we love animals that we see rarely, that we see distantly, the animals that we are closely associated with that we do not invite into our lives. So for example, we invite cats into our lives, dogs, domesticated animals. Those animals are welcome, but the animals that we don't invite, we don't like to see their success. And as a wonderful example of this, I love to consider the pigeon, Columba livia. Boston and Cambridge have wonderful examples of the pigeon, most particularly in Harvard Square. If you go out, there's a very nice flock. It perches above the CVS. And the neat thing about pigeons is that humans domesticated the pigeon. Every pigeon that you find on a street corner today is the descendant of a domesticated bird that somebody loved very much. Loved so much, there are special laws in the Talmud about who owns a pigeon. I'm not kidding. If you go to, if you are reading the Talmud and you are walking around 3,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago and you find a pigeon, if you are within a certain distance of city limits, you may not take the pigeon home. Because it's assumed that if you are finding a pigeon in an urban environment, it belongs to somebody. You would be taking somebody else's property. Because pigeons were domesticated about 5,000 years ago, and we had use for them. We welcomed them into our lives. They were useful because they were delicious. Has anybody here ever had squabs? It's delicious. They were useful because they were messengers, right? Some translations, for example, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in his flood myth, he uses a pigeon, not a dove. Some people actually translate dove in Genesis as pigeon, but I think that's a little weird. So we use them as messengers, and of course, they poop a lot, and we loved that. We loved the fertilizer. And then we lost our use for the pigeon, right? We developed chemical fertilizer. We developed smartphones. We developed chicken, right? We don't need the pigeon anymore, and people started to outlaw the keeping of them in city limits, and finally, the pigeon was just let go. But in all the 5,000 years of its domestication, the pigeon did the one thing that pigeons have done their entire lives. They roosted, they went out, fed themselves, came home, and made more pigeons. And they do it really well, and now we hate them for it. They aren't even spreading disease. They aren't even getting in our way necessarily. They're just where we don't want them. And now we hate them, which I find just abundantly fascinating. The other thing that I found especially fascinating in my research about pests is how much pests are problems of social justice. And you might not think that is the case. Then think about the places that you've been that are infested with roaches, or rats, or bed bugs. Have any of you guys ever had bed bugs? Did you tell other people you had bed bugs? Did you do it with shame? I remember one time my cat had fleas, and I went into the PetSmart to get flea medication, and I said, she has fleas. I just like whispered it. I was ashamed my animal had a pest. And the woman who I said, I need flea medication, just reacted like I'd told her I had plague. And it's because we associate pests with shame, we associate them with disease, we associate them with disgust, right? But if you actually look at where pests live and what pests do, the animals that we call pests proliferate the most in areas where the social contract has broken down. Okay? Some of the places that I ended up doing reporting were encampments of people who are unhoused. Rats are out in the middle of the day, all the time. They do not want to live with rats. Nobody does, right? And people would blame them while you're living this disgusting life. They don't have a house, and you're gonna tell them that this is their fault? And the same is true for roaches, the same is true for bed bugs, the same is true for lice, fleas, mice. Many of these animals proliferate in areas where people have let each other down. They have allowed places to not receive adequate sanitation. Okay, the garbage trucks don't come very often or even at all. They have allowed buildings to decay such that there are lots of holes in places where animals can get in. And then we as a society judge the people living with those animals. So pests are a problem of social justice. Pests are also a matter of perspective. I know. I have 2 cats. In my house, both of them are former ferals that I adopted off my back porch. And I definitely have caught one of them hunting on occasion. We love cats. I mean, who doesn't love cats, right? We love cats. Cats kill between 1 and 4 billion birds per year in the continental United States. They are thought to be responsible for the extinction of 63 species and counting. And what I find fascinating is that cats are not a pest to most people, right? Like, you're not gonna call my cat a pest. Okay, when she's yowling for food at like 5 a.m., yes, she is a pest. But otherwise, you're not gonna call her a pest. She is my pet. She is beloved. I love her very much. But because we love these animals, we have brought them around the world with us. And when we bring them around the world, they get out, they escape. And these little darlings are live prey specialists that are obligate carnivores. And there are lots of things in this world that do not fly or do not fly fast enough to get out of the way. And even so, even as we see these animals drive species to extinction, we will not call them pests. We won't do it, right? There are people, for example, in New Zealand right now, they have a whole movement called Predator Free 2050. I don't know if anybody's heard about it, but the goal is to get rid of every pest, every predator on the islands of New Zealand, okay? They're gonna get rid of the stoats. They're gonna get rid of the rats. There are several species of rats. They're going to get rid of, the possums, which are not opossums, it's different. They're gonna get rid of all these things. Cats are not on the list. New Zealand is coated in cats. 70% of New Zealanders own cats. And they also feel it is incredibly important to let those cats outside. Even though they cause damage, they are not a pest. I also found in my research for this book that animals become pests when they challenge our power and our sense of control over our environments. And this is particularly true for those of us who live in the West, the global North, however you want to call it. We see ourselves as in charge of our environments. And there are some people, I got to talk to a lot of biblical scholars for this book, and it was awesome. I highly recommend, if you ever come across someone who studies hermeneutics, take them out to dinner and buy them a bunch of drinks. They are wild. I got to talk with a bunch of them for this book. And many of them talk about how a lot of people, when they think about human-wildlife interactions, they go to Genesis, where it says, "You shall have dominion over the animals of the land and the fish of the sea," and so on. And so we believe not only that we are in charge, but that we have the right to shape the world as we see fit. And we feel entitled to have places that are only for us, for the animals that we welcome in. We feel entitled to feel safe all the time in our environments. And when we don't feel safe, we lash out and we lash out with anger. There's some really fascinating studies out of the University of California, Los Angeles, with a professor who studied a bunch of Nextdoor posts, because they allow that data out. He studied a bunch of Nextdoor posts of people in LA who have seen coyotes. And they write about coyotes on the listserv. And what they do is they respond in fear. Oh my goodness, you guys, there's a coyote on this corner. I saw it. Keep your children inside. Keep your pets inside. It's a warning. It is a sign of vulnerability. And too often, those animals end up dead. I do have a relatively funny story about vulnerability, though. A pair of friends of mine, kind of, I think, mid-pandemic-ish, they were inside one night. They were watching Deep Space Nine, as one do. And they heard a noise behind them. And my friend Emma, whose name is not Emma, names have been changed to protect the acutely embarrassed, hears this noise and turns around and is like, do we have a mouse or something? And then her husband, Paul, turns around and says, the fuck is that? Because there is a raccoon on top of their bookshelf. And the raccoon is trying not to be seen. The raccoon has failed. The raccoon has been seen, and the raccoon is very scared. And my friends, how would you react if you had a raccoon in your house? They screamed. So step one, scream. Step two, whip out your phone and take a photo. Step three, call 911. Step four, grab a sword off the wall and attempt to kill the raccoon. Yes. So my friend Paul is a martial artist, and he has swords, real ones, on his wall, and he was debating whether or not he could actually effectively kill this raccoon. Luckily, Emma messaged me, and I said, please tell him how much blood there is in a raccoon. Because the answer is a lot, and you don't want that on your floor. Please tell him to, place some tuna outside an open window or door, leave it open, and leave. Give it time to get away. And so they did. But what they'd reacted with in the moment was fear, vulnerability. They had suddenly found themselves out of control of their environment, and they did not know how to handle it. The raccoon is fine, just FYI. And the main thing that I found in my research for this book is that we can make pests disappear. And we can make them disappear not by killing them all. Because the other thing I found in this book is that if you try to kill them all, you will fail. Every single time. We think we are so good at driving animals to extinction. We are so wrong. Oh my goodness. We couldn't if we tried, most of these guys, and we have tried. The things we have tried to do to the brown tree snakes of Guam, it's great. Terrible, but great. But the thing is, we can make pests disappear, and we can do it without killing them. We can make pests disappear by changing our perspective, right? I was saying that we in the West spend a lot of time saying that we are in charge of our environments, right? We need to dominate our environments. There's more than one way to live in this world, and there's more than one way to look at it. And the most valuable thing I learned reporting this book was from talking with people from indigenous groups around the world, a lot of North American indigenous groups in particular, about what they think about pests, animals they don't like. A lot of them don't even have a word for pest. It doesn't exist in their language, because they do not think of animals as being out of place. Humans are part of the ecosystem, and so is every animal. And it is their job to live with those animals. And my favorite quote was one from Joseph Marshall III. He's an elder of the Rosebud Sioux. And he said, that does not mean we are always pleased with one another, but it means that we always respect each other's right to be. Right? This is not like happy Disney living in a forest. Everybody gets mad, don't worry. People have conflict, but they respect each other's right to exist. And a wonderful example of this that I end up covering in the book is one of the Kitasoo Heihei, who live in the Great Bear Rainforest in British Columbia. And they're dealing with black bears, which you can see up here. And they were having a problem a while ago with black bears coming into the village, eating their trash. It was starting to get kind of scary because the black bears on the West Coast get real big, really, really big. So they called in the Canadian government because you can do that. And the Canadian government killed the bears. And they were like, you did what now? And they said, well, our only mandate is to kill the bears. If you call us in, if we're having human-bear conflict, we have to kill the bears. And Douglas Nieslas, who is currently the chief counselor of the Kitasoo Heihei, when I was talking to him about this, he said, we decided right then and there that we did not need them in our lives. We were going to do this ourselves. Because to the Kitasoo Heihei, black bears are very important. Some of them are actually not black. Some of them are white. There is a rare morph called the spirit bear that is a white morph of the black bear. Both of them are sacred. They are very important in their culture. And so they got together as a village and said, okay, well, what are we going to do? And they did not kill the bears. They did not relocate the bears. They changed themselves. They said, okay, we have been living with bears for thousands of years. What did we change? And the answer was they had trash around their houses. They had normal trash cans. They had a fish cannery that was not disposing of everything really well. And a bunch of people had planted fruit trees. Bears love fruit trees. So they all got bear boxes for all of their trash. All of their trash is now firmly in big old metal bear boxes. They took care of cleaning up the cannery, and they pulled up every single fruit tree in the village. They have no more bear problems because they decided to live with the bears and not against them. And we can do that. We are humans. We are scrappy. We can change what we do. All we need to do is change our perspective and learn from these indigenous people. And with that, I'm going to turn to Harriet, who will ask me some very probing and important questions. And then I will turn to you guys, and you all can ask me probing and important questions. Thank you.
All right, well done. So, well, for all of you who haven't read the book yet, it is extremely lively and entertaining, and also full of deep scientific insight. And well, the main, in a way, the recurrent theme, or a recurrent theme, as you could hear from what Bethany has just said, is essentially a question of definition. You know, what is a pest? And of course, animals are categorized in all kinds of ways. So I thought we would start by thinking about the relationship of this category, or apparent category, to other kinds of categories. So to begin with, how does it relate, if at all, to formal scientific taxonomy? I mean, you referred to the taxonomic name of the pigeon.
Yeah, actually, so throughout this book, I have a running joke about taxonomy. Are there any taxonomists in the audience? Oh, good, I hate those guys. Oh my goodness, they're so bad. Anyway, they're so bad at life. No, it's really interesting, actually. As part of my research for the book, I did kind of look at the wonderful things that can be found with Google Trends. Sometimes I just play around on Google Trends because this is what science journalists do for fun. And you can actually see usage of the word pest declining over time, over the last 2 decades in particular. People don't call rats pest very often anymore. I still have Google Alerts set for the word pest. You will actually see more references to sex pest That's the term they use a lot in Australia. That's my main Google alert now, rather than animals as pests. And that's in part because scientists have really tried to dissuade people from calling animals pests because it's judgmental, right? Like it's mean. And that's something that I talked with several philosophers about this, and they talk about, a couple of them have talked about, I'm going to say this wrong, epistemological violence. Yes. I'm at Harvard. I said a big word. Okay, epistemological violence. And basically, when you call an animal a pest, what you're saying is that that animal has no value. And you are allowing other people to do what you want, because that animal doesn't matter anymore. And so conservationists have quite reasonably said, okay, you can't use the word pest. That's not nice. Let's be less speciesist about things. So what I've seen instead is actually this astonishing rise in the phrase invasive species. Yeah.
My next question.
Oh yeah, we're seeing a lot of rise in the phrase invasive species. And I'm almost starting to see the phrase invasive species basically replace the word pest. And basically it's any animal we don't like. This becomes really complicated when you're dealing with animals that are pests to some people, but also native. So for example, a lot of people on the East Coast have started to have problems with white-tailed deer. And oh, they don't want to call them pests. They don't, because you shouldn't, but they're not invasive. So, and you'll see, I also see this with black bear because black bear numbers are increasing. Many of you might be aware of increasing black bear numbers in Western Massachusetts. And they are spreading east, by the way. I've been informed that should they ever reach Boston, it's going to be anarchy. So they're certainly reached Connecticut. People are pretty upset about them there. And yeah, you can't say invasive species. Technically, the bears were here first. So what you see a lot of is problem bear, problem animal. And what's really interesting is that the problem that they're having is a lot of times they've allowed that animal access to food, and the animal is not stupid. The animal has figured out that there is food and it will come back. And then it's the animal that is the problem.
Although I have to say that I've been kind of impressed with the official guidance about the bears, which are I think they're in the outer exurbs of Boston by now.
They are, yep.
And the guidance really hasn't been, call us up and we'll shoot them. It's been, don't feed your dog on the back porch, don't feed birds, and lock your kitchen door. Mm-hmm. So that's a good sign. But anyway, yes, invasive.
Yeah, if you have bird feeders right now and you live in exurbs, please take them down right now, especially because the bears are coming out of hibernation and they're very hungry. Take them down. Anyway, sorry.
Yes, no. So the other bad word that goes along with pests, or possibly, is feral. Mm-hmm. So I wondered whether you had any reflections on that one.
So feral is so interesting. Feral's the word that scientists reserve for animals that were formerly domesticated, brought to a new area, then released, and then they kind of like go back to nature. My favorite thing about the phrase feral that I see a lot is how coverage of animals that are feral gives them superpowers. I know that sounds strange, but I literally have seen numerous articles talking about super pigs. Has anybody else seen the super pigs? The super pigs, they're spreading all over the United States. These pigs are not super. They are not like pig X-Men. They are just pigs. They just happen to be pigs that have gotten away from us. And it turns out the US is really good habitat for pigs, doing super good. But people, I think it's because when we're used to dealing with them in a domesticated context, we kind of disrespect them and we kind of underestimate the capabilities of these animals. And so when they become feral, we're like, oh no, they're super pigs. The pigs have always been that smart. They always have. The horses have always been that angry. So I think feral is a very fascinating term, especially because there's a really interesting difference in the way people talk about feral versus stray when it comes to cats and dogs as well. Feral cats are cats that a lot of times people feel okay killing, and stray cats are ones that we feel should be adopted. There's this really fascinating study that I cover in the book showing that there's a divide in culture in how people think about pests. So cats as pests. So for example, conservationists believe that cats are invasive pests. They are feral. Sometimes they need to be killed. People they live in the same house with, who are not conservationists, see stray cats as homeless pets, right? Both of those people can agree that you need fewer outdoor cats. We can absolutely agree, but they cannot agree on how to get there. Because the ones who believe they are feral will say it's okay to kill them, and the ones that feel they are homeless pets will say that is never okay. And it's a fascinating divide.
And it's interesting that in Australia, the meaning of feral has migrated a bit, so it's almost a synonym for invasive.
Yes. Well, that's partially because most of the animals I cover in Australia is a fascinating place for so many reasons. I did not actually get to travel there physically for this book, and I'm a little afraid that once they read it, they won't let me in. I think they probably just will and will yell at me a lot, because that's just Australia. But the interesting thing about animals introduced to Australia is so many of them have been introduced deliberately by humans saying, we're going to solve this problem with this animal over which we have control. And they do not. And they find this out very quickly. And this has been the case for rabbits. It's been the case for cane toads, horses, camels, carp, freshwater carp, goldfish. There's a list. Cats are there. There's a huge, huge list to see of these animals that have just been brought into this very fragile ecosystem. And every time they're brought in, people are like, no, we've totally got this. It's under control. It's fine. It's never fine.
And then there's what you alluded to about, actually, when we were talking beforehand about the tame foxes. Many of the animals that you write about are well acclimatized to living with us. But we don't call them domesticated. Mm-hmm. But maybe we could think about why?
Yeah, so there is a book actually called Domesticated. If you haven't read it, it's pretty cool. Check it out. I considered writing an entire 2 chapters on domestication in this book, and then I was like, nobody needs that, especially not me. And the reason nobody needs that, especially not me, is that it is such a fraught, you know this, you work on domestication. It is, people get so mad. They get so mad. There are knockdown, drag out, screaming fights in the scientific literature over what domestication is. And the example that we're referring to is the foxes in Russia. You may have heard of the famous domesticated foxes. Yeah, about those. Domestication is a relative term. There is some genetic evidence showing that they were in fact extremely tame before they were brought into the domestication experiment. And that's currently a huge fight that's going on right now as to whether or not those animals are domesticated. There's also this interesting idea that maybe mice, for example, could be called self-domesticated, because these animals have selected in a way, I don't want to anthropomorphize, they're not doing it on purpose, to living with us, and have done it from the earliest time of our history. We have been living with domesticated animals we've been domesticated. We've been living with mice since literally we had houses. We had houses before we had agriculture. We have had mice before we had grain to feed them. The mice saw our houses and went, that, I want some of that. Is that domestication? The mice that live with humans are drastically different. They are very different animals. They solve problems faster. They are less scared than other species of mice that live close to us. They have different memories. They have slightly different ways of living. Does that mean they're domesticated? I am not the person to answer that question. I don't want to be the person to answer the question because the scientific hate mail that I would get, it's not worth it.
Well, and of course, it's interesting to think that what a domesticated animal like livestock looked like 500, 1,000 years ago is not pent up in the corral and so forth. So, okay, well, let's have a question that is more concrete. So one of the ways that people tell you how bad pests are is how much damage they cause, and especially carnivores like wolves and so forth. People are always saying, well, you know, they kill this much livestock and it's worth all that much dollars or euros or whatever. My own personal feeling is that those statistics are completely unreliable, which I base partly impressionistically on a paper I once heard in Finland where the person quoted statistics about wolverine damage to reindeer. And since the whole wolverine population of Scandinavia is less than 1,000.
That's a very small population.
It was anyway, so just wondering whether you have any views about that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things that I found reporting this, animals that we call pests, and more importantly, many of the animals we don't call pests, cause a lot of damage. They cause a lot of pain. They cause a lot of suffering. One of the biggest examples, literally, of this is the African elephant. Nobody would call the African elephant a pest, right? Like, you wouldn't want to do that. There are people who live in Africa who would call them pests, and that is because they cause millions of dollars in crop damages, and they kill hundreds of people a year. I mean, these animals are not like rats. They are very large. And you know, a single elephant can eat a farmer's entire subsistence crop in a single night. And they frequently do. And I found that I actually went to Kenya and I reported with some of the people who had actually, you know, had this happen to them. And you know, they suffer a great deal. And it was actually really interesting to learn how their experiences differed from the experiences of people in the US dealing with crop damage from animals because of what we think about elephants, right? We love elephants. We here in the US, in the West, I have seen elephants. I love elephants. They are beautiful. They are so smart. They're wonderful. And because of what we think about these animals, it affects very much how the people in Kenya deal with the conflict that they experience, right? So for example, to take a contrast to this, Wisconsin. Do y'all know about Wisconsin and wolves? No? Okay, so the Trump administration removed wolves from the endangered species list. They're back on, but this was in late 2020, and in early 2021, Wisconsin held its first wolf hunt in a large number of years. And they set the wolf hunt number, I think, at 130, I want to say. And hunters killed 218 wolves in 60 hours, right? It's a lot of wolves. And there are only about like 500 in the entire state. So that tells you a lot. And part of the reason they did this is because hunters and also ranchers in Wisconsin are very upset about damage to their livestock, right? And we don't want to discount that, right? Many of the people who raise livestock in places like Wisconsin, these are not grand steak magnates. Is that the term? Steak magnate? It should be. That have thousands of heads of cattle. No, these are people who have like 6 cows. And if a wolf takes one of them, that was how they were going to eat that winter. And that cow had a name. That cow was not just food. That cow was important. And people respond to that conflict. People in Wisconsin respond to that conflict and they say, okay, we need to cull the wolves. We need to keep that population down, right, to help these people. Would anyone say we need to keep the African elephant population down in Kenya? Ever? No. They are both endangered species. And that is because of what we think about elephants. We think they are beautiful. We think they are majestic. And the people who are suffering from their conflict are half a world away and brown. There's some of that too. There's a good history of colonialism here that means that people who are suffering the depredations of elephants, and these are not just African elephants, these are also Asian elephants, which actually kill even more people per year. They kill, I think, 1,000 people last year were killed by Asian elephants. And those people, in theory, are supposed to get compensation from the government when someone is killed, when their crops are destroyed. In reality, not so much. And one of the things that I found in reporting this was that, for example, in Kenya, if an elephant kills a human, the family can apply for compensation. There's I think it's like a 15-year process. And they can receive about 50,000 US dollars. If a human kills an elephant, the fine is $5 million and life in prison. Because in Kenya, elephants are worth more than Kenyans are. And that's because of us. That's because of what we believe about these animals. And that's not, it's complex and it's awful. Elephants are important, but people who live with them are important too. And what's fascinating is because of this, right, no one's going to go out killing those elephants. So because of this, there's a great deal of indigenous knowledge and also scientific research that goes into preventing human-elephant conflict in ways that are non-lethal, right? My favorite is they make these fences out of beehives. Literally, it turns out elephants hate bees, like a lot. And you'd really think, I mean, an elephant has skin that is like 2 centimeters thick. You would think it wouldn't be a problem. It is a problem. They have very sensitive trunks, and bees go right up the nose. And when your nose is like as long as your waist, yeah, bees hurt. So elephants do not like bees, and so they've started planting these beehive fences around crops to keep elephants at bay. They will haze elephants with everything from charcoal balls filled with chili powder. Yeah, if animals learn to love spicy food, we are hosed. I'm just going to tell you that right now. Do not feed the rats curry or they will take over the world. So yeah, they use balls full of chili powder and they throw them at the elephants. They will haze them with ATVs and jeeps. They will haze them with helicopters, actually, because they'll fly over the helicopter and the downdraft from the helicopter will, I have experienced the downdraft of a helicopter. It makes you leave. They will haze them with drones. Little quadcopter drones, because they sound like bees. The elephants are very smart, however, and are recognizing this and have started grabbing the drones out of the air. So my favorite thing is one of the guys I was talking to who pilots these drones, he says, yeah, so now we're attaching chili spray to the drone. And they're going to remote control the chili spray. Oh, it's the best. But it's really fascinating to me that so many of these efforts to prevent human-wildlife conflict are non-lethal, right? And we don't have that for wolves in the US. We could have that the technology exists. But so often we turn to killing them instead of coexisting with them, because when it comes to us experiencing human-wildlife conflict, we matter more than the wolves do.
So actually, I don't think anybody has told us what the schedule is, but do you think it's time?
Oh my goodness, I don't know what time it is.
Do you think it's time
Yes.
for you to take questions from everybody else? So, yeah.
I am coming around to you.
Okay, I'll turn off my.
Hi. I was wondering, your talk about invasive species made me wonder, do you think there's a botany equivalent for pests?
Oh, yes. The question is there a botany equivalent for pests? We call that a weed. Actually, it was very interesting. I found, when I first started studying this, and Harriet was prey to me grappling with this definition for like 6 months, and I'm sorry. But pests are in fact harder to define than weed. The definition of weed is a plant that is out of place, which is really fascinating. If you've ever read anything by the anthropologist Mary Douglas, she talks about dirt as being matter out of place, and that weeds are plants out of place, and pests are animals out of place. And that's really, I love that definition so much, because who defines place? We do, right? Like, a weed is out of place. Many people would say that, for example, cornflowers growing on the sides of the road, ugh, they're so ugly, they're out of place, they are weeds. They're one of my favorite flowers, and I'm always really happy to see them, right? It's all about how we define them. And one of the things I found really fascinating that didn't make it into the book, because the book's only about animals with spines, sorry, and not about plants, is that many indigenous groups who I spoke with were dealing with invasive species plants specifically. And I asked them how they were dealing with them. So for example, they were dealing with Phragmites, they were dealing with wild sweet potato, which was introduced by colonists. And for a while, they said, yeah, we were like ripping them up and all that kind of stuff. And it just didn't work. You can't, like, nice try. So I was talking to, oh, goodness. Yes, Neil Patterson. He's a member of the White Bear clan of the Tuscarora. Yes. And he was talking to me about sweet potato, and he said, well, what we started doing now is we just eat it. It's become, we're making a new relationship with this plant, right? It's not a pest. We have realized it's here, it's new, it has a place. And maybe that place is on our plate. And I really love that. And they've started doing that. I was talking with, Darren Renko, I want to say. Oh, I talked with a lot of people. But he was telling me that they think of animals and plants, all living beings, but also actually physical features such as rivers, things like that, as something that they make treaties with, right? And these are not written treaties that are put somewhere. These are agreements of understanding of the way that you function as a person and the way that the tree functions in the ecosystem, right? And he said, an invasive species or a pest is just an animal we haven't made a treaty with yet. It's just one we haven't figured out how to live with.
Hi, Dr. Brookshire. I'm not sure if I've sent you the Australian kids television show, The Ferals, from 1994, which stars...
No, but I've seen it.
For those of you who are not familiar with this high piece of culture, it's 4 puppet animals in a kids show: a rat, a cat, a dog, and a rabbit. The rabbit's name is Mixie, after myxomatosis, the disease that we use to kill rabbits.
Which, by the way, worked until it didn't, and then we had to introduce another disease.
Yes, and then we modified that disease. We're very good at losing. No, I mean, so Australians wouldn't yell at you. They're just loud, which I feel like is like a T-shirt that I need. Not yelling, just loud. But I think they would push you to kind of, what is the relationship, cool, learn to live with the animals that the artists formerly known as pests. What does that mean when those pests are ultimately going to reduce your ecosystem to kind of rubble, right? So there are 1 billion cats in Australia. Most of our smaller, cuter species are going to die as a result of those animals. And we can learn to live with the cats, the ferals, but it's going to result in kind of the death of Australia as we know it, with a couple of exceptions, right? So we did actually get rid of the cats on Rottnest Island, which means that the happiest animal on the planet, the quokka, still exists, thank God. And I was wondering if you could kind of speak to how we kind of the emotions and how we learn to live with pests when it means kind of irrevocable change.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I will say coexistence is not a silver bullet. It cannot necessarily be used in all situations. I would also encourage all y'all, after you buy my book, which you absolutely should, you should go out and buy Emma Maris's book, Wild Souls, Freedom and Flourishing in the Non-Human World. Because she grapples with this question, and she does a lot more philosophy than I do on this question, and basically says, okay, we have this rat introduced onto this island, and this rat will drive this population of seabirds extinct. So we're going to drop 1,000 tons of poison on the island to kill the rat. Should we do that? Should we kill 1,000 rats to save 100 seabirds? That is a really hard question. I don't know that I can answer it. I think coexistence is often possible, and it is a lot more possible than we give it credit for. We tend to give up real early. But I do think in some cases it's not. So for example, he was referring to rabbits, which are infamous across Australia. You may have heard of the rabbit-proof fence movie. That actually was a fence that people tried to build. It did not keep out the rabbits, but they did try. And in response to this plague of rabbits, by the way, the number of species that can reach plague proportions in Australia is amazing. It's so many. I don't know why, but every so often you'll have this massive outbreak of animals like mice or rats or rabbits. Sure. And so what they ended up doing was they introduced a bacterium first called myxomatosis, and that killed off a whole bunch of the rabbits until it didn't, because life finds a way. So then they introduced another disease. This one is a virus, hemorrhagic fever, and it also called calicivirus. And that worked really well until it didn't. Then they made some alterations to it. A couple tweaks, a new strain appeared. We all know what that's like. And that's working now until it doesn't. It reminds me of the Red Queen hypothesis, which is based on the Red Queen in Through the Looking Glass, always running as fast as you can, trying to stay in the same place. Yeah, and I think mostly there are some decisions that we're going to have to make. Right? Do we want to save this one population of tiny penguins from foxes? What are the lengths that we will go to do that? Actually, in an ironic twist of fate, you've heard about the recent reintroduction of Tasmanian devils. So they recently reintroduced a population of Tasmanian devils to an area where they've formerly been living. And these are like happy, cancer-free Tasmanian devils. And then the Tasmanian devils started eating some of the other small animals, and now people are saying the population needs to be reduced. We just did this. But yeah, I think it's a very hard decision, and I think we're going to have to make it a lot, and not just in Australia. We're going to have to make it in a lot of places. Australia, Guam, the Everglades. There are a lot of ecosystems that may change. But at the same time, I don't know that that's necessarily always wrong. I was talking with one of my sources from Australia, actually, about this. We were talking about the feral horses, the brumbies that live in Australia. And another amazing piece of Australian culture is Thaura, the wild brumby. It's an animated series. It's very 90s. Well worth it. Anyway, so they have these feral horses. They're very well regarded. And this particular scientist wants to have them shot at from helicopters because they are trampling on peat bogs, where there are highly endangered, critically endangered species of frogs that will die under the hooves of these horses. And it's a tough decision to make. And I remember we were talking and she asked me, well, what would it be like if everything on the planet was just dominated by pests? What if that was your ecosystem? It's nothing but pests. And I thought about it and I was like, you know what? What was the KT extinction? Like, that killed off all the big stuff, right? It left the small, scuttling things. It left the pests. In a way, that's us. Life will find a way and it will be different from what we're used to. The question is, what does that look like? What do we want it to look like? What do we feel responsible for allowing? And he's a philosopher, so he can answer that question, not me.
Did you have a question? No worries. Do you mind passing this down?
Well, I think there's not a solution for every problem, but sometimes you have to think of the least worst solution, or almost solution. But I think that it really is worth noting today that the biggest pests on the planet are human beings. I mean, we're animals, and we're overpopulated. And it would be a good idea for us to face up to that. And some of the reasons that, there's a whole bunch of reasons why animals, it turns out to be a problem to live with animals. Coexisting, but I guess that's about it. We are an animal. We're just one other animal, and so, we don't talk about overpopulation, control. Some of these animals have to invade because their homes have been invaded. So there's really a call for fairness, I think, that is what I'd like to say.
Well, I'm not talking about population control because that way lies eugenics, and we don't like that. But I do actually note in the conclusion of the book that it's very easy to say, yes, we are the pest. We are the scourge upon the planet. Shame. And I think that's too easy, right? Because we are also humans. We are scrappy. We can be different. We can change the way that we live. We can change our relationships with the ecosystems around us. We can take responsibility, right? I don't want us to throw up our hands and say, well, we're the biggest pest. What can you do, right? I don't want us to do that, right? We can think about it. We can think hard and we can learn about the animals that live with us.
Hey, Bethany.
Hey.
Just to confuse the whole situation a little more, could you say a couple words about parasites?
Oh my goodness, okay. So, parasites. Who doesn't love a good parasite? I've had personal relationships with many parasites in my time. So, yeah, this is where we get into definitions, right? What's the difference between a pest and a parasite? right? And that you also get into that difference with what is a predator and what is a pest, right? I tend to think of pests, and I think about this in the book, pests don't generally directly harm us on purpose. They harm our stuff, right? They're out to eat our crops, or our food, or our trash, or our cats, or our livestock, right? They're not directly preying on us necessarily, except in a few notable cases. But mostly, we're just in the way, right? They are harming our stuff and the things we value, right? Pests are more about what we wish the environment was as opposed to what they are, right? A parasite is what it is, right? It's gonna parasitize because that is its job, right? A pest is just living its normal life, and it is only because it interferes with us that we hate it.
Although it's possible to think that parasitism is just another word for eating.
Oh, it's true. I myself am parasitic on numerous things, most particularly ice cream.
Hi, I have a question related to a previous question about humans as pests. So when I was living in California, a term that I heard frequently, which I actually don't know if it applies to this context, but the term is wilderness-human interface.
Oh.
So okay. So and I hope I'm not misusing it in this context, but
No,
and
you're good.
my question, I think, applies more to the developed world where people live in places by choice rather than an example like your farmers in Kenya. But do you feel like in the developed world, perhaps we as humans, sometimes we are the pests because we are out of place? And is it possible, is it your point of view that maybe we should be removing ourselves from some situations rather than trying to manage our relationship with nature and with so-called pests?
Oh, that is such a good question. That is so good. Oh my God, I love it. Okay, so yes, what you are referring to is the wildland-human interface, which is a major issue in Southern California in particular, because it is one of the reasons that the wildfires get so bad. Is because lots of people are living out there and fire, yikes. So yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think it is, again, a matter of perspective, right? It is a very Western concept to think of wilderness as a place with no humans in it, right? I actually remember I was talking to a member of the Maasai about national parks in Kenya, and he said, yeah, they created these national parks, and like they kicked us out because they said it needed to be like wilderness, and we didn't know what that means. He's like, we've always lived here. This was very strange, and the Maasai are not the only ones. I mean, they're actually still being evicted from lands in Tanzania. And of course, Americans have evicted many indigenous Americans from places such as Yellowstone, you know, in an effort to create what we perceive as perfect wilderness, which is something that has no people in it. Why? Like, that's weird. And that was something I talked with a lot of my indigenous sources about. One of the coolest things, it's not in the book, but I ended up having like a 4-hour conversation with Neil Patterson about the Haudenosaunee language system. Because tangents, you know? Like when one is talking about pests, why not spend 3 hours on language systems? But one of the things that he told me is that they have 2 words in the Haudenosaunee language for wolf. Okay, I will not attempt to defile the language by pronouncing them, but one of them comes from before European contact, and one comes from after. And the one that comes before European contact translates to the dog that does not live with us, right? Because they had dogs, and then they had the dogs that didn't live with them. Those were the wolves. The second one was the dog that lives in the wilderness, because it was only after the arrival of European colonizers that they recognized the concept of wilderness as a place with no people in it. And I don't know that that necessarily serves us well. right? I don't necessarily think that we all need to be like heading out to build beautiful homes in the hills, planting lots of fruit trees, and then getting really upset when they're covered in coyotes and bears. I see you, all of my friends who moved to Colorado. I see you. This is at you. Anyway, they're not here. I can say that. You know who I'm talking about. Anyway, okay. I don't think that we should necessarily be doing that. But I do think that when we move into these places, we need to know what we're getting into. And we need to see ourselves as part of this wildland-urban interface. And to know that coyotes have always been there. And they always will be, because you're not going to get rid of them all. So, like, maybe keep your cats inside.
All right, thank you so much, Bethany and Harriet. I think we're going to wrap this up now, but please, everyone is welcome to join us for a reception in the Cabot Library, and there will be a book signing there as well, so if you'd like to purchase a book, you can do that too. And if we can get one more round of applause for Bethany tonight.